After my father's funeral, my mother inherited $6.5 million. The next day, she made me serve drinks to her friends in a maid uniform. "Smile like you mean it," she sneered. I whispered, "This is cruel." One of the guests filmed everything. Yesterday, after my father's funeral, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table. The house still smelled faintly of lilies and wilting sympathy bouquets. She lit a cigarette with trembling hands and said flatly, "You'll be serving at my brunch tomorrow." "Serving?" I repeated. She slid a ridiculous black and white maid outfit across the table, raising one eyebrow. "Smile like you mean it," she said coolly, "or you can find somewhere else to live." I whispered, "This is cruel." From across the room, one of her friends, Charlotte, laughed and pulled out her phone, filming the whole thing. When my father, Richard Wakefield, died, I thought the worst thing in my life had already happened. It was a bright September morning, cruel in how normal everything looked outside the hospital window. Dad had been battling pancreatic cancer for months, a war he fought with quiet dignity while the rest of us crumbled. I was 25, recently moved back into my childhood bedroom in Charleston, South Carolina, to help with his care. I folded myself back into the house I'd once escaped, pretending that my mother's coldness was just grief, that the sharp edges of her words were dulled by fear. My mother, Sylvia Wakefield, was not the sort of woman who handled real emotion well. She was the type to organize, to host, to spin sorrow into something performative. She didn't cry when Dad slipped away. She didn't hold my hand or whisper that we would get through it. She adjusted the hem of her black dress and started planning the guest list for the funeral reception. After the funeral, after the strangers and neighbors left with their plates of food and their muttered condolences, it was just the two of us in the big empty house. I was scrubbing lipstick-stained wine glasses when she summoned me to the kitchen table like a child being called to the principal's office. She was dressed impeccably, as always. Pearls around her neck, lipstick freshly applied. She looked at me with something colder than contempt, indifference. "You'll be working tomorrow's brunch," she said. Her voice didn't waver. I blinked at her. "Working?" She pulled a garment bag from the chair beside her and unzipped it, revealing a cartoonish French maid uniform. Lace trim, tiny apron, frills at the shoulders. "You'll serve mimosas and canapés." "Smile like you mean it." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the hollow space where my father's love had once been. Maybe it was knowing I had nowhere else to go. Maybe it was the shame I had carried for so long under her roof. But I didn't fight her. I just whispered, "This is cruel," before dragging the outfit upstairs. I told myself I would get through it. One day. One humiliating brunch. Then I would figure out how to get away. The next morning, the house smelled like lemons and expensive perfume. Sylvia's friends arrived in clusters, women with brittle hair and brittle smiles who sipped champagne and gossiped as if it were any other Sunday. I stood in the corner of the living room, feeling like I was melting into the wallpaper. The outfit itched at every seam. I was hyper-aware of the short hemline, the ridiculous heels Sylvia insisted I wear. I carried trays from the kitchen, offering drinks and appetizers like some underpaid event server. My mother barely glanced at me, except when she caught me frowning, then her mouth would tighten, and she would hiss, "Smile." It was during one of these passes that I noticed Charlotte Carrington, one of Sylvia's oldest friends, aiming her phone at me. She giggled, barely trying to hide the fact that she was recording. "She's adorable," Charlotte said loudly to another guest. "Sylvia, you really should loan her out for parties." Laughter rippled through the room. I felt my face flush hot with shame. I looked at my mother, silently begging for her to step in. But Sylvia just smiled, that tight, polished smile, and lifted her glass to Charlotte in a mock toast. The brunch dragged on for hours. I thought it would never end. When the last of them finally trickled out, leaving behind lipstick-stained napkins and half-empty flutes of champagne, I escaped upstairs without a word. I locked my door and sank to the floor, feeling humiliation burn through me. But somewhere beneath the mortification, something colder, sharper stirred. A thought: this isn't just cruel. This is something I can use. I called Maya, a friend I hadn't seen much of since college. She was a young lawyer working her way through family law, someone who had clawed her way up without any help from anyone. When I told her everything, she was quiet for a long moment. "Start recording everything," she finally said. "Anything you can capture. Video, audio, texts. This isn't just humiliation, it's abuse. And if she's stupid enough to let it happen again, it's going to be her downfall." The next few weeks, I did exactly that. I played my role, the dutiful daughter, the obedient servant. Sylvia was basking in her newfound wealth, hosting parties and luncheons like she was the Queen of Charleston. She spent thousands on jewelry, spa treatments, and catered dinners. She didn't notice when I slipped my phone into my apron pocket or left it recording on the counter. It wasn't hard to catch her. The recordings were damning. Sylvia mocking me to her friends. Ordering me to serve them while making snide comments about my lack of prospects and pathetic little career. Charlotte's video had already made its rounds in a private Facebook group filled with Charleston's wealthiest gossips. Maya got access to it within days. When we finally confronted Sylvia with the lawsuit, claims of emotional abuse, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, she looked at me like she didn't recognize me. "You ungrateful little brat," she spat in the courthouse hallway. Her mascara was smudged, her hair messy from running her hands through it in frustration. She wasn't the poised socialite anymore. She was just a woman whose careful mask had cracked. I stood there in the courthouse hallway, feeling a strange sense of calm as she ranted and raved. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, casting a tired gray glow over everything. Around us, people passed by without sparing a second glance, as if scenes like this were just part of the background noise of the building. "You'll regret this," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "After everything I've done for you." I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The case moved slowly at first. Lawyers filed motions. Court dates were set and rescheduled. Sylvia's attorney tried every dirty trick in the book, claiming I was mentally unstable, that I had fabricated the videos, that it was all a misunderstanding between a grieving mother and her wayward daughter. But the recordings told a different story. Every cutting remark. Every sneering command. Every mocking laugh as she paraded me around her friends like a trained dog. It was all there, time-stamped, undeniable. I remember sitting in the courtroom during one of the early hearings, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs as Maya played the video Charlotte had posted. The judge, a stern man with a thick white mustache, leaned forward to watch. His face didn't move, but his eyes darkened. When the video ended, the image frozen on me, standing stiff and humiliated in that ridiculous costume while Sylvia and her friends laughed in the background, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Sylvia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her carefully crafted veneer cracking just a little more. Outside the courthouse, the whispers started. Charleston's old money circles were tight, but they loved a scandal even more than they loved loyalty. Stories about Sylvia's treatment of me spread like wildfire. Invitations stopped coming. Friends she had known for decades began distancing themselves with polite excuses and unanswered calls. Sylvia, for the first time in her life, was losing control. Meanwhile, I stayed with Maya, sleeping on her worn-out couch, sharing late-night cups of tea and whispered plans about what came next. I couldn't afford my own place yet, not until the settlement came through, but even in that tiny apartment with the broken heater and the squeaky floorboards, I felt freer than I had in years. The trial date was set for early spring. In the weeks leading up to it, Sylvia tried a different tactic. Instead of threats, she turned to guilt. She called constantly, leaving long, rambling voicemails about how I was breaking her heart. She sent letters, actual handwritten letters, reminding me of birthday parties she had thrown for me as a child, vacations she had funded, clothes she had bought. As if any of that could erase what she had done. As if gifts could cancel out cruelty. I didn't respond. I saved every message, every letter, adding them to the growing mountain of evidence. Maya warned me that it wouldn't be easy. "She's going to try to break you," she said one night, sipping coffee at the tiny kitchen table. "People like her, they don't go down without a fight." And Sylvia fought hard. During depositions, she cried crocodile tears, painting herself as a poor, grieving widow who had been misunderstood by her troubled daughter. She wore somber black dresses to court, dramatically dabbing at her dry eyes with embroidered handkerchiefs. She made sure the cameras caught her looking every bit the victim. But the evidence was too strong. Every time her lawyer tried to spin a narrative about motherly concern, Maya would pull up another video, another message, another witness ready to testify about the brunch incident or about similar humiliations they'd witnessed over the years. Slowly, piece by piece, the Real story came together. By the third week of the trial, Sylvia's mask had all but disintegrated. She grew snappish on the stand, contradicting herself under cross-examination, sneering openly at me across the courtroom. It wasn't long before her own lawyer started looking like he regretted ever taking her case. The day the judge ruled in my favor, I almost didn't believe it at first. I sat there, hands clenched in my lap, as he read out the judgment: emancipation granted, financial settlement awarded, punitive damages added for emotional distress. Sylvia didn't even stay to hear the full decision. She stormed out of the courtroom, heels clicking furiously against the marble floor, her lawyer trailing behind her with a resigned look. I didn't chase her. I didn't even watch her leave. Instead, I stayed in that courtroom, letting the moment sink into my bones. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself over her. And I had won. After the judgment, everything changed, though not overnight. The court gave Sylvia 30 days to pay the settlement and finalize the emancipation paperwork. 30 days where I didn't have to see her, hear from her, or be anywhere near that suffocating house. 30 days to start breathing again. Maya helped me find a real estate agent who specialized in smaller homes, the kind first-time buyers usually dream about. With part of the settlement secured, I put down a deposit on a cozy little bungalow just outside Asheville, North Carolina. It was a far cry from the sprawling white-column Charleston house I grew up in, but it was mine. No heavy history weighing it down. No walking on eggshells. I furnished it piece by piece, scouring antique stores and estate sales. I painted the walls soft colors, sage green for the living room, a muted blue for the bedroom. I planted a tiny herb garden by the kitchen window. I adopted a rescue dog, a clumsy, lovable golden retriever I named Jasper. For the first time in my life, I could choose what stayed and what didn't. Who stayed, and who didn't. Meanwhile, back in Charleston, Sylvia's world was unraveling. The court proceedings had tarnished her name, and the social circles she once ruled started quietly closing their doors. Invitations dried up. The charity boards she'd sat on asked her to take a leave of absence. Even Charlotte, who had helped kick off the whole nightmare by filming me at the brunch, turned on her when the video leaked beyond their private Facebook group and into local gossip blogs. At first, Sylvia tried to act unbothered, posting carefully curated photos of brunches and parties that nobody was attending, pretending that nothing had changed. But Charleston is a small town when it comes to reputation. Once the tide turned, there was no getting it back. And I never lifted a finger. I didn't need to. She destroyed herself by doing exactly what she'd always done, she just finally did it loudly enough for the world to hear. About 6 months after the settlement, I received a certified letter from her. No apology, of course. Sylvia Wakefield didn't apologize. It was short and sharp. You may have won your little case, but remember, blood is blood. You'll regret turning your back on family when you need it most. I laughed when I read it. Not bitterly, not angrily, just laughed, real and free, the way I hadn't laughed in years. Because here's the thing, I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need her money, her approval, or her presence poisoning every good thing in my life. I had built something better, something real, without her. A few months later, I got another piece of news, purely by accident. A former neighbor from Charleston, Mrs. Alcott, sent me a friendly email after stumbling across my name in a local article about my nonprofit work. She slipped it into the conversation casually, like mentioning the weather. "Your mother listed the house a few weeks ago. Rumor has it she's downsizing, says she can't keep up with it anymore. Looks like a real fixer-upper these days." Shame. I stared at the email, feeling nothing. No sadness. No triumph. Just the quiet, steady heartbeat of closure. Sylvia had always cared more about appearances than love. More about power than family. In the end, she lost the very thing she built her life around. She was alone in that too-big house with peeling paint and cracked tiles, trying to pretend she still mattered to a town that had moved on without her. And me? I thrived. I took classes in counseling, working part-time with abused teens who needed someone, anyone, to believe in them. I wrote essays about survival and resilience that got published in small magazines. I made new friends who liked me for who I was, not who I was supposed to pretend to be. Every now and then, I'd drive back to Charleston for meetings or events. I'd pass by the old Wakefield house, now with a new real estate sign out front, its shutters sagging a little more with each visit. I never stopped. Never felt the need to. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't about hurting the person who hurt you. It's about living well in a life they can't touch anymore. It's about planting your feet firmly in your own story, and refusing to let anyone else write it for you ever again. Dad would have been proud. I could almost hear his voice in the back of my mind, gentle and sure. Be brave. I was. And finally, I was free.